I was 10 the night I knew I could never stand the sound of glass breaking. It wasn't the shattering that scared me. It was what always followed. Screaming, crying, and sometimes silence so loud it pressed against my chest. My name is Alana. I grew up in a house where love wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft. It was sharp, it was loud, and sometimes it was painful. My father, Richard, was a man whose anger filled every room we lived in. His footsteps were heavy, like a storm ready to tear everything apart. To the world, he was a hard-working man, quiet, distant, maybe a little cold, but to us, he was a monster in disguise. I remember how Mama used to try and shield Jason and me from the worst of it. She'd lock us in our room when things got bad, whispering promises she didn't always keep. "It'll be over soon, baby. Don't worry, just stay in here." But I wasn't sure if she believed it anymore. It wasn't the fights that tore me apart. It was the quiet moments in between, when nothing was said, but everything was broken. The heavy air, the unspoken fears, the looks on Mama's face, so tired, so worn down. Some nights, when it was too quiet, I could feel the tension wrap itself around my chest, squeezing until I couldn't breathe. Jason, clutching his teddy bear, would look up at me with those big, innocent eyes and ask, "When is Daddy coming to say sorry?" I'd hold him tighter and whisper, "Soon, Jay, soon." But deep down I knew the truth. Daddy never said sorry. Not in a way that meant anything, and I was too young to understand why anyone would let someone hurt them like this. One night the noise went beyond breaking glass. It was the crash of a chair, then a thud, and then nothing. I rushed to the kitchen, heart pounding in my chest. Jason was behind me, holding onto my sleeve. "Alana, what's happening?" he said with so much fear in his eyes. I didn't have an answer. I only saw my mother, kneeling on the floor, her face bruised, her eyes swollen. My father stood across from her, breathing heavily like an animal on the edge of rage. I froze. I wanted to scream, I wanted to do something, but all I could do was stand there. I was just a little girl. What could I do? "Get out of here, Alana," Richard spat. "Go to your room." I didn't move. Jason squeezed my hand harder. It wasn't until Richard left the kitchen, slamming the door behind him, that I knelt beside Mama. Her hand trembled as she wiped the blood from her lip. Her eyes didn't meet mine. She didn't say a word. "Mom," I whispered, "please, are you okay?" She just nodded, but I knew she wasn't. That night, I climbed into bed beside Jason, both of us too scared to sleep. The dark was a friend and a foe. It hid the tears but made the silence louder. I held him close and whispered, "It'll be over soon, Jay. Just close your eyes." But it wasn't. Not yet. When Mama died, I thought the world might stop turning. It was the kind of grief that wraps itself around your ribs and makes breathing feel like a distant memory. Jason and I stood by her bed that morning, watching her face, trying to find the woman who had always been our protector, our heart. But all I saw was the stillness, the emptiness. They said it was a heart attack. They said it was sudden. But I knew it wasn't sudden. It had been coming for years. The stress, the pain, the constant fear, it had taken its toll on her, and it took her before she could ever find peace. I remember the last thing Mama said to me. It was the night before she passed. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper, but it carried so much weight. "Alana, you're stronger than you know. Take care of Jay for me. I won't be here much longer, but you've got this. You're going to be okay. Both of you are." I didn't understand what that meant, and I wasn't sure I was strong. Her hand trembled in mine, and for the first time in my life, I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying a burden no one should ever have to bear. I promised her, then and there, that I would protect Jason. But even as I said the words, I had no idea how I would do it. The funeral was quiet, too quiet. People came, mostly family, distant relatives who pretended they cared, but we all knew they were just waiting for it to be over. Mama was an only child and her parents were long gone. There was no comforting warmth, no sense of relief, just cold, empty faces. And when the last person had left, when the casket was lowered into the ground, it felt like a part of me had been buried with it. But the pain didn't stop. Before I go on with my story, can I ask you something? Where in the world are you listening from? Knowing that someone somewhere understands, even just a little, gives me the strength to keep going. Please, tell me in the comments. It would mean more to me than you know. A few months passed before my father's death. It was just another day, like any other. I was sitting in the living room, trying to ignore the silence that was suffocating me, when I got the call. Alana, it's the hospital. Your he's gone. Gone, just like that. No fanfare, no grieving family, no apologies, just gone. At first it felt like relief. He wasn't there to hurt us anymore. But then, something else crept in, something I hadn't expected. Emptiness. There was no one left to hate, no one left to blame, just a big hole where my family used to be. Uncle Joe came to collect us. He wasn't much of a father figure, but he was the only family we had left. His house was different, quiet but in a way that was peaceful. No broken glass, no yelling, no fear, but there was also no love, no warmth. Jason and I spent most of our days holed up in our rooms. I didn't know how to feel anymore. What do you do when the only life you've ever known is gone? It took time, but slowly I started to feel something again. A spark of something, anything. The weight of the past didn't disappear overnight, but I began learning how to carry it differently. Years went by, I and Jay moved out and got our space. Jason started high school, growing taller and more independent with every passing day. I was working and going to school at the same time, juggling deadlines, bills, and trying to piece together some version of a future I could believe in. There were moments I felt proud that we had made it this far, that we were surviving. But even with all the change, all the progress, something was still missing, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't love, not exactly. It was more like peace, a place where my soul could exhale. And then I met Marcus. It didn't happen overnight. At first, Marcus seemed like the answer to everything I had been waiting for. Someone who treated me like I mattered, someone who saw me for more than the broken girl I felt like inside. I had never experienced a kindness like his. We met at a cafe downtown, of all places. I was working there part-time, trying to get by. He was a regular, always ordering the same black coffee, always smiling in that easy, effortless way. He had this aura about him, a calm that felt safe, almost too good to be true. One morning, he sat down at a table by the window, just as I was wiping down the counter. His voice was warm when he spoke to me. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, nodding to the chair across from me. I smiled, shaking my head. "Nope, all yours." He grinned, that easy smile that made me forget all the pain I'd been carrying for so long. We talked for hours that day, about everything, nothing. And somehow it felt like everything in my life had led me to this moment. At first, everything was perfect. He'd call me every night to check in, sending little texts during the day, just to remind me he was thinking about me. There were no games, no manipulations. He made me laugh, he made me feel special. For the first time, I felt like maybe I could be loved. As the weeks went by, Marcus and I grew closer. We spent our weekends exploring the city, laughing over dinner dates at my place, walking along the waterfront, and talking for hours about our dreams, our fears. It was easy. Too easy, maybe, but I didn't care. I was happy. I deserved to be happy. For the first time, it felt like I could let my guard down. Then one evening, things started to change. It wasn't anything obvious at first. It was the little things. He'd text me less. He'd get frustrated more easily when I didn't answer the phone right away. I brushed it off. I told myself it was just stress from work, but deep down I felt it, something shifting in him, in us. And then came the first argument. It was small, a disagreement over something silly. But the way he raised his voice, the way his jaw tightened when he spoke, made my heart skip a beat. I recognized that tone. It was the same tone my father used when he was angry, when he was about to lose control. "I don't understand why you can't just be on time, Alana," Marcus snapped, throwing his hands up in frustration. "You always do this." My stomach churned. The sharpness of his words hit me harder than I expected. "I'm sorry," I murmured, avoiding his eyes. "I didn't mean to be late." He softened for a moment, his expression shifting back to that easy smile. But it didn't feel the same. The smile didn't reach his eyes, and my stomach twisted. The argument started to happen more frequently after that. The smallest things would set him off. A missed text, a change in plans, a forgotten promise. His words became sharper, his temper shorter, and every time he'd lash out, he'd apologize afterward, profusely. He'd beg me to forgive him, promising it would never happen again. But each time, I felt a little smaller, a little weaker. And then, one evening, after a particularly heated argument, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood there, my body trembling, trying to hold myself together. "I don't think I can do this anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus froze, his eyes widening with shock. For a moment, he just stared at me, as though he couldn't believe what I had said. "Alana, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't leave me. You mean everything to me. I can't live without you." I took a shaky step back. His pleading made my heart ache, but it was the kind of ache that felt like a warning. I could hear the desperation in his voice, the fear in his eyes. "You don't understand. I love you. I need you," he continued, stepping closer to me. My chest tightened. I had heard this before, the promises, the apologies, but something inside me screamed that this wasn't love, it was control. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I can't do this. I need to move on," I said, my voice more firm now. His face twisted, the pleading turning into something darker, something possessive. "You can't just walk away from me," he said, his tone shifting. "Do you think you can just leave after everything we've been through?" I flinched. There was no warmth left in his voice, only anger simmering beneath the surface. "You owe me, Alana," he said, his voice low like a growl. "You owe me everything." My heart pounded as the room seemed to close in around me. I knew I needed to leave. I knew this wasn't what love was supposed to feel like. I started to back away toward the door. "Alana, don't you dare walk away from me," he hissed, grabbing my arm before I could reach the door. His grip was tight, too tight. The fear I had buried deep inside suddenly surged up. This wasn't the man I had fallen for. This was a man who would stop at nothing to keep me in his control. I looked at him, and for the first time, something inside me snapped. I wasn't gonna die like my mother. I wasn't going to let him destroy me like my father had done to her. "Let go of me," I shouted, my pulse racing. For a moment he didn't move. His eyes were wild, almost frantic. "If you leave me," he said, his voice trembling with rage, "you'll regret it. I'll make sure of it." I gasped, pulling my arm free. It felt like I was in a nightmare, trapped in a place I couldn't escape. "No, Marcus. This ends now," I whispered, finally pushing past him and running out the door. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The fear I felt, the anger, the manipulation, it was all too much. I had seen this before, too many times. It had taken me years to escape the shadow of my father, and I wouldn't let Marcus pull me back into that darkness. I walked away with shaking hands, my chest tight, but with something else too. A sense of strength I hadn't known I had. I wasn't gonna let him break me like this. Not again. I didn't cry when I walked away from Marcus. Not right then, anyway. The tears came later, in private, when I could finally catch my breath and let the weight of what had just happened settle in. I had never truly realized how deeply I'd buried my fears, my trauma, my past, until I walked away from him. And even though I felt a strange relief at leaving Marcus behind, I also felt the sharp sting of something I couldn't quite place. Something deeper than the anger, the hurt. It was a kind of emptiness. The next few days were a blur. I stayed at a friend's place while I figured out my next steps. Jay was at his friend's. I didn't want him to see me broken. I couldn't go back to my apartment. Not yet. It still felt like his presence was everywhere, like his shadow lingered behind every corner, every room. The walls seemed to close in every time I thought about going back. I spent most of my days in a fog, just going through the motions. At school, I could barely pay attention. Work was a distraction, but even then, my thoughts kept circling back to what had happened with Marcus. How had I allowed myself to fall into that trap? How had I not seen the signs? I remember the first time I told Jay about Marcus. I had been avoiding the conversation, knowing that my brother would have been furious if he had known about what was going on. He would have said something, probably tried to intervene, but I'd kept it from him. Now, sitting at the kitchen table one night, the truth spilled out, and I finally let myself break down in front of him. "I should have listened to you, Jay," I said, my voice breaking. You told me to be careful, and I let my guards down." Jay's face softened, and he reached out, pulling me into a tight hug. He didn't say anything at first, just held me while I cried. It felt like it had been so long since I'd allowed myself to cry, truly cry, without fear, without shame. "You're stronger than you think, Alana," Jay said quietly after a while. "You always have been. I am glad you are okay and he is no longer in your life. That is all that matters." It was hard to believe him in that moment. I didn't feel strong, I felt like a mess, a broken version of myself. But hearing him say it made something stir inside me, something small but powerful. Maybe I was stronger than I thought. A few weeks passed before I started to feel like I was breathing again. I began seeing a therapist online. Just someone to help me sort through everything I'd been through. To understand why, like my mother, I had chosen a person who was unhealthy for me. It was hard at first, but I knew it was the only way I could move forward. I stopped keeping my pain locked away. I started telling people about what had happened, starting with Jay. I didn't have to hide it anymore. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need to be ashamed. I had made up my mind to focus on what truly mattered: Jay, my education, and my job. I refused to stay down any longer. It was time to rise and bring out the very best in me. I had just sat down with my laptop, attempting to make a dent in the schoolwork I had put off during the week. I was so wrapped up in my thoughts, trying to get lost in the task at hand, that I didn't notice him until I looked up. He was sitting across from me, his gaze focused on his phone. His face was relaxed, almost like he wasn't concerned with anything in the world. There was a calmness about him that immediately drew me in, but I quickly looked away. It was nothing at first, but then as I stood up to grab my coffee, I bumped into him. "Oh, sorry about that," I said, embarrassed. He smiled at me, his eyes lighting up. "No problem at all," he said with a soft laugh. "You must be stressed." His voice was warm, and for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I needed to shrink away. We talked for a few minutes, just the usual small talk. And in that short exchange, something shifted. I wasn't expecting it, I wasn't looking for it, but there it was, a gentle warmth, a quiet understanding. We started running into each other more often around campus. In between classes, at the quad, in the hallway outside the lecture hall. Somehow, Ethan was always just there. That same quiet smile on his face, like he carried his own little pocket of peace with him. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we'd just exchange glances and a small wave, but it was always easy. Always comfortable. Being around him didn't feel forced. It felt like breathing. A few weeks later, he asked me out for dinner. I hesitated, the old doubts and fears creeping up. But there was something in his eyes, something so sincere and calm, that I agreed. That dinner was the first time in a long time that I felt at peace. Ethan wasn't like Marcus. He didn't push, didn't pressure. He didn't try to make me feel small. He simply was there. He listened when I spoke, laughed when I made a joke, and never once raised his voice. There was something about him that made me feel safe, not in a way that stifled me, but in a way that made me feel free. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly I began to let my guard down. Ethan never rushed me. He never asked me to be anyone but myself. When he asked me out, I didn't hesitate to say yes. I told him about Marcus, about my past, about the pain I'd carried for so long. He listened, and when I was done, he simply held my hand and said, "You're stronger than you realize, Alana. You're worth so much more than you've been given." I believed him. I believed that I deserved to be loved, that I deserved someone who would cherish me, not control me. Marcus was no longer in my life. The toxic grip he had on me was long gone. But what remained, what I held on to, was the lesson. I wasn't going to end up like my mother. I wasn't going to stay in a relationship that drained me, that made me feel small. I wasn't going to let myself fall into the same cycle of pain and fear. With Ethan, I learned what love was supposed to feel like. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It wasn't painful or exhausting. It was quiet, steady, and safe. I looked back at the woman I used to be and realized something. I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the scared little girl hiding in corners, waiting for the storm to pass. I was a woman who had fought for herself, for her future. I had made the choice to walk away from the things that hurt me, and in doing so, I had found a new beginning. As I sat there with Ethan, feeling the warmth of his hand in mine, I knew this was only the beginning of something beautiful. I believe in the beauty of the love we're building, one filled with peace, gentleness, and deep respect. I open my heart to a relationship free from fear, where love feels safe and nourishing. I trust that our connection will grow stronger, rooted in kindness, honesty, and mutual care. This is the love I deserve, and it's the love I choose to nurture every day. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and share it with someone who needs a little hope. More emotional and inspiring stories are coming your way soon.